Now, for people living in the flood zone, their jobs are likely the last thing on their minds. But what happens if you need to miss work to save your property? We're joined now by Alex Lucifero, partner with Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Alex, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Annette.
This is a reality for a lot of people. They are dealing with floods, and I'd imagine they're not able to get to work. They have to be at home pumping out the water. So do they have a right to take time off when an act of God, if you will, occurs like this?
It's an important question and a timely one. Obviously, we just saw those pictures of the flooded zones. Those areas of Ottawa are obviously in a state of emergency, as is the city of Ottawa itself. And luckily for those employees who are having difficulty managing both their home being potentially flooded and managing their jobs as well, there are some protections. It's important to note, and I make this point on the segment quite often, the employment laws in Ontario are actually quite robust. They're quite protective of employees. And the same applies with leaves of absence, as it applies with severance or as it applies with discrimination, for example. When it comes to leave of absence, in a case like this, the Employment Standards Act in Ontario, which does apply to most employees in the province, does have emergency leave provisions where if a state of emergency is declared in a city or in a community or in a town, that employee is allowed to take time off if they are affected by that emergency.
So in this case, how much time would they have been allowed to take off? Is it as long as we're under the state of emergency?
There's actually no limit under the Employment Standards Act. So there's no defined period of either 2 weeks or some other types of leave have periods of 28 weeks, but there's no defined leave as long as the person is affected and unable to do their job because of the emergency, then that person is allowed to take a leave of absence. Now, it's important to remember, and for our viewers out there, these leaves are unpaid.
Okay.
So an employer has no right, or no obligation rather, to pay an employee to be off of work and on leave, but they are allowed to go on leave as an employee and have their job available to them when they come back.
Okay, the employer cannot stop them from taking that time if they need it.
Correct.
Okay, should employees then register with relief and government organizations so there's no hardship here, so no issues, so that they can be getting the aid that they need?
I think that might be a good idea, generally speaking, regardless of their employment situation. But I think from an employment point of view, yes, I don't think that's a bad idea. Ultimately, you would want to provide your employer with some sort of proof that you're dealing with the emergency. I mean, pictures of a home that's flooded might be enough. You don't necessarily need to register with any particular agency. And also, you want to give your employer as much notice as possible as an employee. You don't want to show up 3 weeks later not having shown up to work and say, "Oh, well, I had an emergency." You want to let them know as soon as possible.
Right. I would ask how would that unfold? What's the best way to do that? To contacting your employer, I would imagine, as soon as possible and letting them know the situation you're in?
Correct. Exactly. And keeping them abreast of the situation.
Giving them an idea of maybe how long you could be off with your situation.
That's
What about if they have to go on a sick or medical leave as a result of even the flooding? Some people may find themselves under quite a bit of stress. And medically, we saw one gentleman there in Catherine Latham's piece where his feet had been affected and they were hurt as a result of walking around underwater. You don't know what he's stepping on. And that might be the case for others. They could be getting injured as a result of all the work they're doing, maybe hurting their backs with the sandbagging. So if they end up having to take a medical leave, what does that look like?
Well, and this is one of the most common types of leave that we see in the employment environment, medical leave of absence, or what we call sick leave as well. And again, employees have strong protections when it comes to leave of absence, as long as you have the support of your doctor. So your employer doesn't necessarily need to take your word for it.
Okay.
But if you as an employee have a note from your doctor saying you are unable to work, you can certainly take a medical leave of absence. Again, that absence may very well be unpaid. You can certainly apply for employment insurance or potentially apply for disability benefits if that's something you're covered by. But your employer cannot stop you from taking that leave as long as it's doctor authorized. And really, that leave can last quite a significant amount of time. There is no set period where an employee is authorized to come back from a medical leave of absence, as long as the person remains unable to work, but that there is a foreseeable possibility that the employee is going to return to work. The employer has to hold that position for the employee, waiting for them to return. So again, the protection is quite strong when it comes to medical leaves.
And that's a small bit of good news for the people dealing with all of this morning.
In
Alex,
a very difficult situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alex, thank you very much for your time this morning and for breaking it all down for us.
Thank you.